Welcome to Real Health with me, Karl Henry. Folks, on this episode of the podcast, Dr. David Coleman joins us to discuss fear, anxiety, and his brand new book, Fear Less. We talk about why anxiety is rising, how to tell the difference between healthy and unhealthy fear, and practical ways to disrupt anxious thinking so we can fear less and do more. I, for one, cannot wait to read the book, but also to get his tips as he's in studio, all the way from Clare to chat to us. David, welcome.
Thank you, Carl.
Another book.
Another book, yeah, and it's a long time since I've written a book, so it was a very odd experience. I think, I mean, I know you've written books, but it's a slightly traumatizing experience. Like it just takes a long time. You know, the writing takes a long time. You think, well, that's it, and then the editing seems to take ages, and then the book obviously comes out, and that's great. But I swore after I did the last book, which was probably, I'm going to say 10, 12 years ago, that I wouldn't write another. And but yes, here I am with another book.
Did you fear writing a new book when?
It wasn't the fear of it. I mean, I think I would consider myself pretty good at writing. But I'm not sure I enjoy it all that much, which is ironic because I mean I write for the Irish Independent every single week. You know, I've written books. I write so much stuff, but it's just it's laboursome. And so I wasn't really in the mood. But then, I suppose there is definitely a need for a book like this, in my view, because I think there's a lot of children and teenagers, particularly out there now, that are really struggling. And I think what's happened in society over the last number of years, some of it's kind of good, but there's been a huge discourse on mental health. And I'm not a big fan of the phrase mental health. I rarely talk about mental health with regard to children and teenagers. I talk about their emotional well-being a lot.
Yeah.
But the difficulty with all the discourse on mental health is that kids and teenagers and their parents end up pathologizing things like anxiousness. So I have teenagers, for example, who'll come into my clinic and they'll go, David, I have anxiety. And, they say it as if, well, I have COVID or I have the flu or, whatever, I have diabetes. And they describe it, as if they have a lifelong condition that they're never going to be able to resolve. And that, I think, is not the most helpful way to think about anxiousness, because we all have a potential to be anxious. In fact, it's important that we can get anxious. And we want our children and our teenagers to be able to get anxious. But what we also want them to be able to do is to regulate that anxiety enough that it doesn't get in the way of life, that they can still do the things that they might want or need to do without getting overwhelmed by their anxiety. So I think, the purpose for me in writing this particular book is to just give parents the sense that they can really help their kids straightforwardly. It's not magic. There's no great, kind of science to it. There is science behind it, but there's no, it's not, it's easy to do if you know what you're doing. And so I think if parents and then their kids and teenagers can feel like, oh, okay, so I feel anxious, but that's pretty normal, and there are actually lots of things I can do to feel less anxious, well then that's a good thing, and so I don't have to be held back by it. I don't have to be restricted by it.
Why do you think people are self-diagnosing a lot more?
Oh, well, I mean, the internet is the source of it all. Without the internet, and now we know that the likes of ChatGPT and Claude and all the other AI bots, they're all now becoming pseudotherapists, and people are looking to them. I have parents who will say to me, for example, so I've been looking all this stuff up on ChatGPT now, and
Stop.
And then they tell me what they think is wrong with their child or what the issue is. Yeah, or they're looking for tips or guidance about parenting, and and invariably, if they've come to me at that point, obviously ChatGPT hasn't been enough.
Wow.
But yeah, people rely on this now, and so with the rise of social media as well, and children's access to it, hopefully that'll be diminished as time passes and new legislation.
Do you think that's a good thing?
Oh yeah.
I do too, by the way, but I'm trying to be, ask the question as if put it out there.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's critical. I think we should go further than just banning social media. I think we should actually make it illegal for children and teenagers to own smartphones or any internet-enabled device. I think if they didn't have access to the internet until they were 16, at least their lives would be way better.
Wow.
So if they couldn't stream, if they couldn't play Roblox, if they couldn't get onto social media, their lives would be better. If they didn't have that kind of source of addiction, because that's what it is becoming increasingly. We know that the algorithms, the AIs that's powering social media, it's designed to get kids looking at screens all the time. because that's how they make money. So so I think it would be brilliant if we could enact legislation that restricts it, that just makes it impossible for kids and teenagers to have access to the internet in unless it's that their teacher or their parent is looking something up for them if they need to learn about something. So all that access to the internet has meant that children and teenagers, they feel anxious about something, they look it up, and straight away they're fed all this information about anxiety as a disorder and as something that is potentially a lifelong condition, and that freaks kids out as well. And so then they feel helpless, and I want them to feel powerful. I want them to feel like they can, as the book suggests, fear less.
Presumably that's the flip side of mental health promotion.
Yeah.
Is that by putting it out there, which is brilliant and really important for society, it's important that we talk about our emotions, from depression through to anxiety and so on and so forth. But the flip side is that idea of you're almost talking people into thinking they have something that they may not have.
Yeah. Exactly that. I think there is no doubt that there are people who have mental illness. That's absolutely the case. There are some very significant, things like psychosis and schizophrenia. There are things that trouble a lot of people. But the vast majority of people don't have mental illness. They have, troubles in their life. And those troubles then, cause them to feel in lots of different ways. And those feelings sometimes can be overwhelming. And at times then that overwhelm, I think, is what leads us to feel this powerlessness that we just can't ever get ourselves out of it. But, I've yet to experience a feeling that hasn't passed sooner or later. Nobody goes around, for example, going, oh, geez, I have a fierce dose of happiness. Oh, my God, I am just, I don't think I've been this happy for this long. It's shocking. They don't. But sadness is just a feeling like happiness. Anxiousness is just a feeling like happiness. But we talk about them differently when they're negative. And that, I think, isn't helpful. I mean, it's not that there aren't people who don't suffer. People do suffer. But, if you think about resilience, like there's no way to develop your resilience until you've suffered. And you have to suffer. But what you don't want is that suffering to be extreme or overwhelming. If it's extreme and overwhelming, you can't learn from it.
A little bit of hardship goes a long way.
Yeah.
The book, Fear Less. Chat to me about fear then. There's good fear and there's not so good fear.
I think all fear.
Or is there a difference between them?
Fear is just fear. I think there's fear that will absolutely get in the way of things. I mean, anxiety can become problematic for children and teenagers because it prevents them doing things. The most common behavioral response to feeling anxious about something is to want to avoid. So we know that there are children, for example, who are avoiding going to school because they feel overwhelmed in a school environment. They might feel anxious about their social interactions, or they might feel stressed or anxious about the number of people or the tasks that they've got to do or the organizational requirements that are there for them. And so that means then that there are kids who are not going to school, and that means they're missing opportunities to learn. So that would be an example where anxiety can become a problem. And there are a whole host of actual anxiety disorders, like, obsessive compulsive disorder would be an anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder is, as it suggests, an anxiety disorder. You have phobias, which are specific, kind of forms of fear. And so, I mean, there are definitely disorders out there, and anxiety can be problematic. But for most people, it doesn't have to be, because we have skills that we can teach people, children and teenagers in my instance, that allow them to just regulate it. So I often think it's a little bit like having an oven. And so if you have an oven, you don't get a choice about whether that oven is switched on in terms of anxiety, because life and circumstance will make you feel anxious. So your oven will get switched on. But what you want to feel then is that you've got some control over the temperature regulation. So you've got your thermostatic control that allows you to at least turn the temperature down. So in the case of anxiety, that's about being able to feel less anxious. So the intensity comes down. So that means then that, if you were to rate your anxiousness, for example, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is, totally panicking, freaking out, full-blown panic attack, and 0 is totally chill. If your anxiety feeling, as you rated yourself, is up somewhere between 8, 9 or 10, that's overwhelming. That's going to prevent you doing things because it's just too much. Mm-hmm. It's too unpleasant, it's too uncomfortable, and you won't be able to kind of think rationally while you're in that state. So we want children and teenagers to be able to bring their anxious feelings down to somewhere even between kind of 4 and 7. That's enough. It doesn't have to be down at 0. It doesn't even have to be at 1 or 2. Even if they can get it down to a 4, 5 or 6, that means that they will, to use isn't there a book out there called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway?
Oh, yeah.
And that's what we want children to be able to do. We want, not that we want them to be able to feel the fear, but we want them to know that even though they're anxious, they can still go ahead and do the thing that they want.
They have a toolkit to be able to deal with the anxiety.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the analogy of the two pot plants.
Well, that's about thinking styles. And so one of the things that happens is that particularly when we have anxious thoughts or whatever, they just become repetitive in our head. And so we can end up, lots of people describe it as overthinking. And so they're worried about something, and the more they think about the thing that they're worried about, the more worried they feel, the more worried they feel, the more they think about the thing that they're worried about. And so that then becomes a little bit like if you have two plant pots, one of which has some weeds that are growing in it and the other which has lovely flowers growing in it, but all you spend your time doing is watering the flower pot with the weeds in it, or the plant pot with the weeds in it, and you neglect the flower pot that has the flowers, then what happens is the weeds flourish, they thrive, and the flower dies away. And so we want to do the opposite. We want to nourish the flowers and let the weeds die away. So what that really means in practice is finding strategies and ways that we can access our positive self-talk, for example, or positive affirmations, or anything that reminds us of our capacity to cope or to manage or to be able to do, rather than feeling unable to do, or like we're not going to cope, or like we're, that something bad is going to happen. So it's about how can we access that kind of positive self-talk and positive thinking to allow us then, because positivity will breed positivity, then we'll feel more positive, then we'll feel more able, then we might be able to do the thing, then we get all the positive feedback of, wow, I did it, I achieved it, doesn't that feel great? And so that's what we want.
That's something on a societal level that Irish people are not great at. Positive. Like, we love a good bitch and a good moan, and I love, isn't the weather terrible? It's been raining for 56 days non-stop. Terrible. It's the worst I've ever seen in the history of Ireland. We're very good at kind of feeding the anxiety, if you like, or feeding the
negative.
The negative, yeah.
I think so. I think as a society, we definitely have a more negative slant on things. Like you say, if you ask most Irish people, how was your day? You'll either get grand. It's like, just don't ask me about it, I'm not going to tell you. Or you get, oh, my day, wait till I tell you. And then you get the litany of, the 3 or 4 big things, which might have been stressful, but you forget about all the positive things, the good things that happened. And so, one of the small antidotes to that you can start to do is to bring in a gratitude journal into your life. And so particularly at nighttime, just before you go to bed, if you have a little journal beside your bed, and just write down 4 or 5 things that you felt good about during the day, that felt you could be grateful for, or things that were just good about your day. Just jot those down, and it's transformative, because what it does is it begins to shift your mindset into this more positive space, which is really helpful when you're just about to go to sleep, because who wants to be thinking of all the crappy things just before you go to sleep? Because that's how you end up overthinking and not being able to sleep. And so that small shift can make a big difference. My wife, during COVID, started doing a gratitude journal, and I was like, oh, I don't know about that now. Is that's like, that can't really work, can it? And so I was very poo-pooing the idea, and she was like, no, David, it's really good. You should absolutely try it. I'll get you a little book if you want, in typical mammy fashion, I'll pull one out for you. And so anyway, I eschewed the opportunity to do gratitude journaling for a couple of years. And then I decided that I was getting unhealthy again and needed to go back to doing some personal training. So the guy that I used to do some personal training with down in Killaloo had moved off into the wide world and was now doing online training. So I got in touch with him again, and we started doing some online work. But he was less about the training and the sessions that I was doing, and more about just shifting into more positive habits. And so Connor's his name. So Connor O'Shea, I'll give him a little shout out. But so Connor came to me the first thing. Next thing after I'd signed up to do the work with him, this journal arrived. This black book, beautifully leather bound book arrived, and in the post. So next time I was on to him, I was like, Connor, I got this thing. Oh, he said, yeah, that's for your gratitude journaling. I was like, oh, okay. So, of course, I started gratitude journaling because that was part of the program. And so my wife then, looked across at me one evening going, I can't believe it. Like, I suggested that to you 2 years ago.
I told you so.
And you wouldn't listen to me. But Connor suggested, once Connor suggested, you're straight into it. So
those conversations are in households all around the country.
All around the country.
That's for sure.
We're no different.
With anxiety and negative thoughts, the thoughts can spiral. How do you interrupt that process? If you see it happening or it begins to happen, How do you put a pause gap there?
So there's a couple of things that you might need to do. I mean, the difficulty with our thinking is that, our rational thinking is governed by our what I call our upstairs brain, but the kind of neocortex, so all this kind of part of the brain up here. But fear and anxiousness and worry is really driven by the downstairs part of the brain, the brainstem. And so that's where a lot of our instinctive responses are kind of generated to things. And so when the downstairs part of the brain is really activated and giving lots of signals that we are potentially in danger, it just means the upstairs part of the brain, it's almost like it's rattled, it can't quite get itself into gear. So we need to do something usually to try to settle the physiology of the anxiety. So we have to use something like a breathing technique maybe to calm ourselves down, or there are lots of kind of what people call grounding techniques, which is just something that brings you back into the present moment. So it's very much about anything that's kind of vaguely mindful is going to bring you back into the present moment. So people will do things like what they call the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique, where you try to name 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, and so on, all the way down using your 5 senses. So that then just brings you back in the present moment. That in itself can interrupt the spiral into the negative thinking, because you're now focused on something different. And then, if you kind of bring that in with something like a breathing technique, you do a long, slow, deep breath just to try and, calm your nervous system down. Then you go back to normal breathing, and that's when you try to introduce the positive self-talk. Then you do another long, slow, deep breath, a bit more positive self-talk, a third long, slow, deep breath, more positive self-talk. That usually, for most people, in an acute moment of like, oh my God, I'm really stuck here, I don't know what to do, is enough to just free us up to get back in the zone where we can kind of rationalize the situation and realize that we're not in the kind of extreme danger, and the danger, I don't mean danger as in that we're about to be knocked down or mugged or anything, but just the danger that, I'm going to be in the situation, I'm not going to know what to say, this person's going to ask me a question and I'll blank it, or whatever the situation might be that feels dangerous to us. That's usually enough. But so the grounding is great, breathing exercises are great, and then one of the techniques I use a lot with children and teenagers particularly is a little exercise, an imagination exercise about pink elephants and golden dragons. So I get them to imagine a pink elephant and spend 2 or 3 minutes describing a pink elephant to them, so they've got a good strong image in their head. And I'll have advised them that there's 3 parts to this exercise. So that was the first part. Then once they've got a good, strong image of a pink elephant established, then I'll say, look, I want you to put aside that image now, and I want you to just pick something else. Imagine something else for me. But what I really don't want you doing now is thinking about a pink elephant. I want you to think about something different. So I'll say, so look, don't think about anything pink now, because that'll get you back thinking about the pink elephant. So they'll do that, and then at the end of a minute or so of them trying to think about this other thing, I say, look, how did that go? What were you thinking of? Was it easy to think about the other thing? Were you able to think about it exclusively, or did you have occasional intrusive thoughts of pink elephants? And they'd say, oh well, yeah, of course. Well, you kept mentioning them now, that wasn't really fair. And I'll go, yeah, hands up, absolutely, I didn't make it easy for you. And then I'll move on to the third part of the exercise, which is to get them to imagine a golden dragon. So again, spend a couple of minutes trying to generate, a description of a golden dragon to hopefully allow them to get a really strong image in their head. And so because they're spending so much time and psychological energy creating this image, at the end of those couple of minutes, I'll say to them, out of interest, in the last couple of minutes, were you thinking about a pink elephant? And they'll go, no, I wasn't. I was thinking about the golden dragon.
Of course, yeah.
And so that's a very powerful exercise for a child or a teenager, because it shows them a couple of things. The first thing is that they're in charge of their thoughts. They're not a slave to their thoughts. So if you speak to anybody who describes themselves as an overthinker, they will feel that they don't have a choice. These thoughts just come. I can't get them out of my head. It's just the way it is. And so that's fine, I get that. And so, but the reality is we can choose what we think about. And so that exercise shows children and teenagers you have a choice about what you think about, and whether it chooses to be pink elephants, the weeds, or golden dragons, the flowers, to merge those two analogies. And so if we have then, as I say, that analogy where the pink elephants are representing the worry thoughts and then the golden dragons represent the positive thoughts, they have experienced that focusing intensely and intently on golden dragons meant they didn't think about pink elephants. So focusing on the positive stuff intently and intensely means that they don't have the space to be thinking about the negative stuff. And so that's really powerful for certainly most of the children and teenagers I've worked with over the years. Like, it's the one thing that they tend to hold on to, partly because of the imagery involved, but it also then becomes a bit of shorthand. So we might be talking, a couple of sessions later, and I'll say, wow, okay, that sounds totally Pink Elephant now. And like, where were the golden dragons? And they go, oh yeah, well, oh look, Dave, I was, and then they'll try to explain to me why they were stuck in, again, their whatever automatic negative thinking.
What's the biggest misconception around fear that you want to tackle with the book?
Well, I think it's this idea that it's a condition that's lifelong and pervasive, and you can never manage or regulate your fears. And I mean, the whole, the title of the book is that you can fear less. And so, if you can fear less, then you can absolutely do more. And so I think that, just as a concept, if you have this idea that, oh, I can regulate this, I'm not bound into this, I have choices here, then that just makes it doable and possible. And that frees an awful lot of people up then. And as soon as you start to have an opportunity to do some of the things that you had previously felt anxious about, you realize that you can succeed at them. It's just liberating, because then you go, oh, okay, you get all this kind of, positive feedback going, well, that worked really well. Oh my God. And I thought I was desperate. And, I thought I was going to go in there and I thought I would be like mortally embarrassed, and I wasn't. And I still got, I actually stood up and said the thing that I needed to say, and nobody fell over laughing, and nobody ignored me.
The world kept going.
The world kept going. Yeah.
Absolutely. The book is fabulous. It really is. The best of luck with it.
Thank you.
It is available in bookstores nationwide and online.
Absolutely. Yep.
Any signings?
Well, so I'll be going into some bookshops to sign it, but I'm not doing any public signings.
I did that, by the way. I was too scared. I had the fear of
nobody
public signing. Yeah, absolutely. I said, I'll quietly go in with my Sharpie and I'll walk around every town I can to sign them, but not an official signing, because there's too much fear. I should have feared less.
Yeah.
Great to see you. Thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Dr. David Coleman, the very best of luck with the new book, Fear Less, the 10-step guide to helping kids take charge of anxiety. It'll work for children. It'll also work for adults too.
Absolutely.
I'm sure. So for children and adults alike, you can pick it up in bookstores nationwide. Folks, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Real Health with me, Karl Henry. As ever, you know where we are, at Karl Henry PT on Instagram, realhealth@independent.ie, and on the Irish Independent website. And if you liked what you heard, don't forget to rate and review. We'll see you next week. Slán go fós.